Anyone who's grown up inside a business will tell you it isn't easy. Being the boss's son or daughter means you better get to work earlier, stay later, and gripe a hell of a lot less. Silver spoons don't last long in the field, and so many techs follow in the footsteps of their mentors. I know because I followed my mentors into physical work because I respected them. Now my son is following me. It's pretty cool. Evan Forosisky has paid his dues inside the family business and then some. With his own scar tissue, he's making the mark leading his New Jersey based organization. Let's hear where the work took him. Evan, thanks for coming in today.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. I know you're busy, but taking time to come in and tell us a little bit about your past, your story, so to speak. I want to say I'm thankful that I got to meet you. I think we first met, was it about a year ago?
Yeah, probably a little bit longer at coming down to Calvert to see you.
And I think, well, prior to that, I reached out, looking for mentorship.
Yeah.
And you
You got a one-on-ones.
you didn't know me, and it was like you took you took it on. I think that was right before, or might have been right around the time that you transitioned into the regional president. So you had GE, which is the company that you were running, and then you had regional. So then you picked up what, 3 more companies, all new to you, and you still took the time to spend with me on the phone. And I appreciate that. We had some good conversations.
Yeah.
And
I missed those one-on-ones.
well, we could do it again. Hey, I'm all about it. I really appreciate it. It gives me you're very successful. You come from a successful company, family. Your dad, I've met your dad, Gary's. He's an awesome, phenomenal guy. So I tell you where it all began for you. I know a little bit about your background. I came up in the family business. The first career, my first company, I've only been with 2. Actually, Elena's is my 3rd one, but where I cut my teeth in the mechanical industry was a family business. And there's this stigma about a boss's kid. And you might know where, this might resonate.
It's not a great stigma.
It's not. So talk a little bit about that. I know for the situation that I experienced, it was you tend to have to work harder. You tend to have to be above and beyond anybody around you. Almost set the pace. Because at the end of the day, that's the boss's son, right? That's the boss's kid. Was any of that like that for you growing up?
Yeah, I mean, definitely those stigmas were out there. But I think for me, and at the time I didn't know it, but I think the fortunate thing is how early I started in the business.
Which was?
Honestly, so my brother was 2 years older than me. And so he was about 9 and I was probably 7. And so our summers, school, when you're out of school, were 3 days a week, you had to be at the office, and for a half day when I was like 7 and 8. And I think by the time I was 9, it was, you were there a full day, and it was mainly
was that your dad's rule?
Yeah, well, yeah, his rule was pretty simple. You can have anything in life as long as you work for it and you can pay for it, right?
Wow.
And so, so most kids, they're off during the summer, they're going to the community pool, vacations. At the time, he made sure that we had to go to the office and work. And so for me, my brother was much more analytical, or I should say office minded, and I was much more field. So I would be out in the shop, cleaning the shop, maintaining the tools.
Are you referring to what, you're more mechanical? More hands-on, turning the wrenches.
If you ask my brother for a socket, it's a good question mark on what you're going to get. Probably a
pair of channel locks,
screwdriver. And he thinks he's doing it right, but you won't get the socket that you intended. And for me, I just remember I had this big key ring, and I thought I was the best. Like around the shop, I would walk around. I would know where every key would go for all our different trailers. We get deliveries, and I would help unload them. So I started getting familiar with the forklift, and we had backhoes and excavators. So I was always tinkering around in the yard. So that's kind of how I started in the business. So to answer the question, did that legacy or that notion of boss's kid? I started so young that nobody had an expectation, right? Like I was just there in the field. And then as time went on and we struggled in the office, everybody looks at like you own a business and like everything must be great, but there was definitely a lot of not so great moments, and we still, every growing business goes through them. But like there was a time that I was also the dispatcher, when I was like 10 or 11, right, and working through Excel sheets. So the evolution's been pretty interesting. And at the time, I was like, man, why am I doing this, and how does this going to help me, with anything? And now I look back and it just got me a lot of experience in a short amount of
It was
time.
by design. I think he had it all laid out, right?
I think by design and also by necessity, right? When we didn't have a dispatcher, and he looked at his two boys, and he's like, you know what? I think we can make something work here. And yeah, sure enough.
What has that helped you looking back? That played a major role, obviously, in your roles now. So, what did that do for you?
Yeah. So, God, I remember. So, we had the dispatcher role. Luckily, that was short lived for, I think, a summer, maybe 2 summers. And then I was back, maybe getting like 12, 13 back in the shop. And every now and then we would get a job where my father would know the people that we're working for, right? And so like I could be at that age, I could go out on the job. And that was like the best. Even if I was just running around getting tools for people.
Just being out of the shop?
Just being out of the shop was like nobody could ask for a tool faster than I could give it to them. Because I'm just like to be out, and the day would just go by, and then so as time went on, that happened more frequently as I got older, and then when I was 16, even though I didn't have my license, I was running small projects just because I've again been doing it for some time, especially if it was anything utility, whether it's sewer line, water line repair, outdoor running the equipment.
Wow.
Snow plowing.
You were having fun.
Yeah, anytime I could tinker with the equipment. Then when I got my license, then it became like, hey, now it's like you don't need to know the people per se. You can actually go run the calls. You're old enough. We can get you in a vehicle. And so that started happening at 17, but I was still in high school, so it was like a summers only. And then when I was 18 and graduating high school, I was pretty much running full time in a service capacity, mainly on the plumbing. Or what we consider our construction or project side. So whether it's welding, pipe fitting, plumbing service, we weren't as heavy into. We did some HVAC, and I was definitely involved from a service or installation end mainly, and we did maybe a little bit of refrigeration.
Did you tend to gravitate towards the pipe fitting side?
That was definitely
Why do you think?
I just loved again, you need like big tools, welders. You get to look at a project at the end and watch it like work. And, I love things that are straight lines and figuring out offsets. And so like for me, it ran true. And, but I also didn't realize like the little things of like my dad would ask like, hey, well, how'd you do today? I'm like, oh, we did great. Like you should see all this. Like,
Got 100 feet of pipe.
well, he's like, how many linear feet did you run?
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, well, I don't know how many linear feet. We did great. He's like, well, how do you quantify you did great if you don't know how much you ran?
Wow.
Right. And so like, then you start realizing, okay, and it's not just about speed. You got to have quality with speed, though,
Absolutely.
right? And so it just got me in the mindset of thinking a different way. And then before you know it, I was like running crews where we would be pulling, whether there are we'll consider our full-time guys, or even if they were guys for a project that we hired out of the hall, right, to come. And then
You were in charge.
to be overseeing them was an interesting dynamic. But I think I never really had a lot of issues because I typically was the hardest working guy on the job, being the first one there, being the last one to leave, and then also in between just making sure that, they had everything they needed.
You never used that boss's son as like that get out of jail card, right?
No, I think I was almost treated opposite because, and if you guys know my father and you interviewed him, I mean, there was no special treatment. Actually, I think it was the opposite.
The opposite,
There was a
yeah.
higher expectation because you were part of the family, and so he could hold me accountable for different things than others.
So, adversity, challenges. You ever get in trouble? You ever screw up?
Well, I mean, we'll keep it in work because there's plenty of stuff outside of work. But I've been fired a couple times.
Fired?
Yeah.
By who?
By my father.
By your dad.
Yeah. Once was for not washing a van well enough.
I gotta hear this.
Yeah,
man.
no, I thought the van was washed fine, and I forget how old I was, maybe 12, I don't know. And but he was convinced and probably right at the time. I'll give him a probably that it could have been washed. It could have been washed better.
Wow.
So I had to call my mom to pick me up that day because I was no longer welcome.
What did she say?
at the office? She wasn't surprised.
She knew.
So we a little bit of backstory. We actually had a full family business. My mother used to be involved in the
Okay.
business, but that it was probably not the healthiest dynamic. We'll call it that, and so that she's no longer part of the business. So yeah, she'd have to pick me up and
Wow.
get
And
the.
how'd you? Obviously, you got your job back. How'd that go?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the details, but I think my mother convinced them probably. And then also my age probably played a role on, you're allowed to have one mistake here or there. And then the other time, I believe I was using the backhoe in the yard and we had this pipe rack and I wasn't watching or looking and I hit it with the bucket, I hit the pipe rack and I'm like, I can fix this, right? And so I bent the pipe rack back using the machine and I thought, all right, no harm, no foul. We're
You
good to
wanted
go.
to know.
But looking back now, we still actually had that pipe rack. It kind of like did one of these,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so he does the lap around the yard every time before he comes and goes, and so he's like, hey, you hit anything in the yard? I'm like, no, I
Oh.
did nothing, and so had I would have just owned up to it, it would have been fine. But if you didn't own up to it, that was.
There's, there
I
was
was also banned from ever operating the backhoe again. Which I think was revoked because I became like our best
best operator?
our equipment operator. So.
there's a saying I always tell my son too. Now I was like, just know when people ask you the question, they most likely know the answer. So don't you just open up with it.
Yeah, and so I learned. I guess I learned the hard way, but I also then learned from that point where like, yeah, mistakes are going to happen, accidents are going to happen. It's better to just own up and figure it out.
When you look at that, do you think he could have handled things differently for you?
Oh, I'm sure he could have. I don't.
Do you use?
But
any
I don't
of
know that I regret any of it.
Right.
Like to go back. Like I don't know that. I mean, I'm sure everybody has different parenting styles, right? And I think if you worked at GE, how many years do I want to go back here? But 15 plus years ago was a different GE than it was 10 plus years ago. It was a different GE than it was 5 years ago. And I also think today's world would not, the GE 15 years ago wouldn't work in today's environment. It's a little bit different.
Yeah.
I think just the old school mentality. My dad came from nothing, and so and he's not scared to go back to that. So he ruled a little bit with an iron fist. Yeah.
Yeah. You ran a tight ship.
Yeah.
That's good. Looking back with some of those experiences that you learned from obviously watching your dad, you are obviously leading way more people than you probably ever anticipated. Are you using any of that in how you lead now?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually there was definitely turning points. I was outside of work. Motocross was a big sport for me, and like when work got to a point of like there is no like you got to make a commitment. He was big on like you either got to be all in or you're not. Like when you run a business and when there's nobody else to answer the call, you always got to answer the call. And so for me, like that 2012-ish timeline is probably when the switch was actually fully developed of like, all right, I'm all in because I'm pretty much shelving my motorcycle riding or having a personal life outside of work. Luckily, I had a long-term girlfriend at that point who's now my wife. But
Awesome.
we were going on probably about 6 years at that point.
So there's no culture shock for her. She saw this.
Yeah, she was good. She was my motocross racing partner for many years, and so I don't know that she misses as much as I do with all the traveling and living out of a trailer on the weekends. But like that was a switch when I realized like work was just we were getting busier, we were growing. I've been involved with the business for multiple years at that point, and so I think it helped with my father being able to focus more on the business side and me out in the field. And then I continued to just grow in the field. We started to do a lot more HVAC refrigeration. I had to figure that out. More so, again, researching on my own, listening to what some of our techs have to say, but also taking it for sometimes it's not always valid information or the most accurate information.
Doing your own research.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I also was, from the early 2000s, mid 2000s, I was in engineering school, doing full time mechanical engineering.
Wow. So do you have that license now?
I have my degree, my undergrad in mechanical engineering, and then my graduate in master's in engineering management.
And full tilt.
So awesome. there was and in New Jersey, there's some licensing requirements for plumbing license, HVAC license that either you go through a formal apprenticeship program, or you have an engineering degree, right? And so I went the path of, I didn't go through the formal apprenticeship program.
Okay.
I came up through the field of just the GE field, we'll call it, and being in the family. Every job I was on, I was always considered like owner operator or part of the business. So I didn't have to I wasn't a card carrying person.
Okay.
But nonetheless, still learned through the field. But then the engineering allowed me to get my licensing requirements for plumbing and HVAC.
And I'll say that, I mean, I remember like when we would have our sessions, our conversations, you're busy. I mean, like you volunteer firefighter?
Yeah, I'm a deputy chief for our now deputy chief, recent promotion. But
So you're doing that.
Yeah.
How often are you doing that? Deputy chiefs, that's not just showing up when you want to show up.
yeah, there's definitely some requirements to go along with that. It is. There's definitely a time commitment, but it's one I'm truly passionate about. I think we do a lot of good for the community. I'm an instructor at the county for the fire program as well.
Wow.
So do that when we can. And then back home, I mean, I help. Now we've built up a team at GE, so it's great that they're taking on the courses that we train, but helping develop in some of our early on, like our in-house training program. We put on a program for pump stations, for the 101 of jetting, for drain cleaning.
Right.
And now the team has put on, they're starting to create electrical for the non-electrician type class, and like that helps our trades that they get some of it through the union program, they get some of it through field experience, but it's kind of like there's some gaps missing sometimes, and so we're trying to fill those gaps.
I remember complaining or bringing up some challenges of technicians coming out of the apprenticeship program, like I felt like they were lacking so much, and I had an instructor kind of put it back on me. He goes, "Hey, dude, like we have them 3 times a week. You have them all this other time.
Yeah.
What are you doing?"
Yep.
And I'm like, "Good call."
The guys that have good mentors
Absolutely.
tend to fare better. And that's something that we've tried to be on the forefront of that, and realizing the investment in training, and I think we're doing a pretty good job at it.
I tell you, looking back, and you worked in the field. I know for myself, I look back when I was in the field. I thought like, this is it. I'm stuck out here in the field, right? What's your message to those guys that might be listening right now or watching this, or having a bad day? They're out there, it's 120 degrees. I think at one point when me and you were talking, your guys were running 80 to 100 hours a week in the dead of summer.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And I know you do a lot of great things for their wives at GE. I think you might send gift cards and, hey,
Holiday
we're
hams.
getting ready to we're getting ready to take your husband or your fiance for the summer. Thank you.
Yeah, the spousal gift.
But what are you telling those guys out there? Because you're frustrated, you're sweating, you're in your third shirt for the day.
So luckily, and for the sake of safety, we've come a long way, and so those 80 to 100-hour work weeks
I
have
probably
become
wasn't supposed to say that.
have become few and far between. But you're not wrong. Well, first question: what do I say to the guys in the field? I miss the field every day. So just realize, like,
What do you miss about the field?
I think just like being able to accomplish something, and then actually looking back and be like, okay, and then on to something new, right? Like where, as you move more into management or the office, I think things get a little bit more repetitive. And I would just, I always, and some people think like, okay, for me to move up, it must mean that I must go into the office. Well, no, I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think there's plenty of positions in the field and field leadership roles and things that are now developing. For me, it was a little bit organic and not as planned. Like we just had voids in the business. One void I just remember is like, hey, all these recommendations I write on the ticket, what happens after I write those recommendations? And the short answer was not a lot, right? And so I'm like, okay, well then, like I need to figure out how to make sure we're doing something about those recommendations. So I'm like, hey, all recommendation tickets, make a copy, let me see them, and like I can start to follow up on them. And then I realized that I was starting to run projects based on those, right? And so then I kind of quasi came into this estimator project manager role, and for us it was combined, right? Like I was doing the selling, the estimating, and then also managing the project from start to finish. And so that happened for many years, and then I realized that I was at one point I was like split between the field and the estimating project managing. I was like, okay, I'm a lot of times running my own jobs that I'm quoting and doing, but then at some point I'm like, okay, now the project manager side and estimating is starting to take over, where I'm 25/75, and I would say probably for the last 5 years I've been pretty much constantly out of the field. At one point the guys would still pull me in on anything that, like, especially if it was a pump station control panel, we kind of had like a niche market there, but a void in our technical experience amongst our team. And so a lot of times the guys would be reaching out to me, or if it was an underground job, if it was deep or wet, again. And then we have vac trucks. How many guys have CDLs? I was one of the ones that, again, when there's nobody else to answer the call, you always got to be on call.
Right. Do you feel that technicians at times don't realize how important their job is, or maybe people don't reassure them like, hey, you're very important to this business? I mean, without technicians,
You don't have a business.
There's no business.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been one of like nothing but utmost respect for the field and what they go through, and like the summertime frustrations. I remember one of our longtime technicians, well, actually two of them. One, him and I used to butt heads all the time, especially in summertime. Right? He's like, "This is crazy. Like, why aren't you hiring more?" I'm like, "You think if I had the guys available, I would hire them, right? Like, this is the evolution you go in a business that is a lot of weather dependent.
Yep.
And you never have the right amount of technicians for the exact amount of hours, because the minute you get to 42 hours, they're like, "Oh man, all right, like what are we doing? We hiring more?" And the minute you get to 38, you're like, "Hey, what, where are my hours at?" Right? So it's such a tight
crazy
line.
I call it feast or famine, man.
It is.
It's either, yeah.
And I think having trying to tell people the right message and being consistent. And the message has always been that, like, when you come on our team, we are going to support you through thick and thin. If it's thin, you're coming to the office, we will put you to work. Like, we'll figure it out. But you also got to stick with us through the busy times, right? And like, we gotta get through those humps. I think also the fact for me it helped is I was out there with them a lot of it. So like, it wasn't like, "Hey guys, like I'm calling you from the shore house and like,
yeah, AC 60 in here."
yeah. I'm like, "No, like I'm out there with you, and we're figuring it out together."
So all these things, all these experiences you've had, where do we go from here for technicians in the industry? I mean, I know you got to have a great idea. You're always thinking 10 steps ahead, Evan.
Well, I think two parts. So one is like, if technicians are inspiring to do more, be more. I think to be proactive and communicate to the management teams is huge. I think sometimes there's a void there of like, it's office versus field.
Oh yeah.
And if we can create it where that's not the case, and you're actually
tear that wall down.
Yeah, like that's huge. And then you create opportunities you never knew. Like, hey, like the reason that I think there's an office versus field is because I feel like we're lacking in X, Y, and Z. Great. How do we close the gap where we're lacking? And so that also then creates opportunities for the field. And not everybody wants to come out of the field, and not everybody also wants to inspire to have more responsibility. They can be really good at what they do and very valuable to the team. You can also inspire to say, "Hey, I want to do additional things. I want more responsibility." Great. Yeah. Avenues for both. The ones that say, "Hey, I want to, have more responsibility." I think you also got to realize, like, okay, take the onus on you. You can set your own destiny, but you also got to be vocal about it and let people know that you're looking for it.
Know what you want, right?
They can't read minds, and they also sometimes they're not seeing or feeling everything you're seeing or feeling, and so bringing that up, having some regular cadence with your manager. And then like saying, "Hey, here's where I want to be." Great. Let me bring you in for a day or a week or a month and show you what that's about, just to make sure that this is something you want to do. And if you do, let's figure out how to get there. It's a different muscle you're working though, coming from the field to the office.
It's a different life.
Yeah.
It's a
You're living it.
I am. Every day I learn something new, and it's a challenge. I tell guys all the time when they come out of the field, I'm like, this is going to be one of the hardest things you're ever going to have to deal with. First thing is, forget looking at your watch, because you're in the field. You get paid by the hour.
Yeah.
But what are you telling someone that's listening right now? What are you telling that person? Maybe looking back at that technician at 18, 19, 20, or in their 30, whatever it may be. What is a good coaching point for them right now?
The biggest thing I found, the people that have succeeded the most are the ones that don't look to point blame, right? Like if you just own what you're doing and realize that you really do control your own destiny. Now, granted, you got to be provided the fundamentals, right? And the tools, and you got to have a good culture. But as long as the company has the core values that make sense, the rest is up to you. And so I think if the reason that I believe that had success is because when I didn't know something, I researched it, right? And I figured it out. And I never was like, always thinking forefront of like, how do I get more by asking. Like I wanted to show value, and
Right.
and I think with that, then value came and followed. And I believe if you're at the right spot, then that will be equally reciprocated. So that's
I appreciate you coming in today. You hit some great points. Very
Yeah.
successful business. You I'm sure there's gonna be more for you down the road. Your team is phenomenal, man. You got every person I've met from GE, which says a lot about you and your father and the culture there. So thanks,
yeah
man. I
yeah.
appreciate
No,
it.
appreciate it.
All
So
right, man.
look forward to continuing the conversation.
Definitely.
Cool.